I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much. It's an incredible time. It's an amazing moment in history where essentially 3 billion global workers have found themselves working from home all of a sudden as a result of this terrible coronavirus. So very pertinent topic. And we've got a lot of eminent senior people here on the call to discuss how their companies have weathered this storm, how prepared they were, and what challenges they faced. So as we look around, we've got Graham from Arm. So various people from different sort of backgrounds. Rob from Arup. We've got Michael from Ryder Cup and the European Tour. Thomas, who works in the automotive construction business in terms of polymers. We've got Steve from TATA and David from Thoughtworks. So a mix of manufacturing, professional services, consultancy, IT, all here to offer their rich insights into how they've gone through this difficult time of crisis. So let's open up with typically what happens in the typical adoption technology life cycle. So as we move to the next slide, this is just really the typical S-curve that a lot of us are familiar with. We get early adopters that try out the technology. We get the early majority. And these are pragmatists. They're usually risk averse, but they want to really sort of buy from market leaders. Then we have the late majority, and those are pretty much conservative buyers. They don't want to get stung by new technology, and they invest when the technology is mature. And then we get rather a difficult term to sit with, but laggards. But laggards, they really adopt when they're forced to. That might be, for example, when your digital PBX is no longer supported. And then let's see in the next slide what happens when technology comes along. Well, technology comes along, and in terms of value and benefit, you get the diminishing returns of the old technology as people start to explore what new benefits and business benefits this new technology offers. And that usually is quite a regular time. If we look at the life cycle of PBX, it used to be 5 to 10 years. So typically this used to be a 5 to 10 year cycle. As we move to the next slide, what then happens is there's a number of trends that happen. So we start looking at what it can do for our business. How is it being adopted? And we see that the early majority and a mainstream are sort of learning from the trials and tribulations of the early adopters. So if we move to the next slide, these are the sorts of typical trends that we saw prior to COVID. So generally in the unified communications and collaboration market, we saw a trend away from premise-based PBXs. So we've seen all vendors reporting a double-digit decline year over year in premise-based PBXs, and more of a move to cloud-based. Why? Well, it provides you with a great platform for business agility. It moves from a CapEx to an OpEx model. It's less in terms of management, and it's more of an administrative task. You don't have to worry about upgrades. There's a lot of compelling reasons why people are favoring a move to the cloud. And there's also, or there was, more of a move away from multiple products and more to consolidated suites as people look to rationalize their investments. We also saw a focus away from knowledge workers and more towards frontline workers. Now, knowledge workers are those people that can work from wherever they got an internet connection. The term was coined by Peter Drucker many, many years ago. But what we've seen is this move to encompass more frontline staff. So the people that don't necessarily have a desk, they may have a mobile phone, they may have a tablet, but they're the people that are really sort of up there at the front line dealing with customers day in, day out. And what we've seen over the past is not a great deal of integration between the front office and the back office. So a lot of communications solutions have really looked at the desk-bound workers and occasionally those working remotely, but not so much with those with a smartphone. We've also seen a move away from unified communications and more around team collaboration. So not necessarily the voice, the video, the integrated messaging and the meetings in one single client, but more to a place where project teams and departments get work done. So a way in which you can share and collaborate on files, the way in which you can have various different modalities, be that voice, video, or meetings, or business chat, and extending across the digital supply chain. So not just necessarily intercompany, not necessarily intra-company, but outside of your domain. So intra-company across your supply chain of partners, suppliers, and customers. So as we move into the next slide, bang, here comes COVID, creating a crisis. Now, it's been a difficult time. And what it really has done is accelerated an awful lot of those trends. So what we've seen is COVID has acted as a huge technology accelerator. And those trends that we saw taking place over 3 years have really been compressed into a short period of time as people have struggled to adapt their businesses to suit this ongoing crisis. And really, as we move to the next slide, this is really what we're talking about here. It's about strategic responsiveness and organizational flexibility. So a lot of companies can almost describe themselves as oil tankers. They're very, it's very difficult for them to react very quickly to market demands. And that requires an awful lot of stuff. It requires a focus on business operations. It requires a focus on strategic planning. There are sometimes cultural issues. So how do you get everyone working from home? It's not necessarily a technology issue. However, technology, of course, does have a role to play. And arguably, one could say it's taken a global pandemic that has forced these 3 billion people to work remotely for the benefits of unified communications and collaboration to be really understood and brought to the fore. And perhaps looking at your unified communications and collaboration platform as a vital strategic asset for business continuity. So those are some of the lead up to what we'll be discussing later on in the conversation. And what I really wanted to do with you in the next slide is sort of share with you our recent global research, and this is literally a couple of weeks old, as we went out to nearly 1,000 companies worldwide. And this gives you an insight into how prepared people were for employees to work remotely. So from this slide, we can see that 8% of people didn't have any business continuity plans in place and were completely unprepared. It'll be interesting to go back to that survey and see if those companies are in business. As you look at the global pandemic, it's been incredible to see how people have actually stepped up to the mark. We've seen people like Under Armour, who make sportswear, suddenly start making paper masks. We've seen people like Melita, who make coffee filters, making paper masks. Loads of breweries around the world making hand sanitizers. Suddenly they've had that ability to shift focus and to have that that way in which they can look to respond appropriately to these troubling times. Only 17% of those that we surveyed said that they were fully prepared and were able to make the move and the transition to remote work as part of their business continuity plans. 17%. I find that quite staggering, especially when you consider that, I don't know whereabouts in the world you all are, but in Europe, we basically test our fire alarm procedures twice a year. So those of us based in an office have to work our way out to the car park. A fire alarm goes off and we all leave by the nearest available exit. We don't do that sort of thing in terms of business continuity. So it's interesting to see that we'll do that for fire alarms, but we won't do this for business continuity. And of course, business continuity can strike, or those sorts of issues can strike. It doesn't necessarily have to be a global pandemic. It could be travel disruption. It could be civil disobedience or strike. It could be bad weather events. It could, God forbid, fingers crossed, it could be another global pandemic. So we've got a lot to learn from this, and there'll be some interesting discussion later on. Moving on to the next slide. We wanted to look at as to how many people were actually home-based prior to COVID-19 and during it. So during COVID-19, I thought this would be more. Just over half the workforce were sort of home-based. Post-COVID plans, 34% of people looking to introduce this as a flexible way of working. And prior to COVID-19, well, only 18%. So as we can see, there's going to be some wide-reaching implications as a result of a lot of learning from this. And as we move to the next slide, the last question that I wanted to share with you is what is your organization's plans once COVID-19 has subsided? And let's hope, fingers crossed, that that is sometime soon. It's extremely disruptive and very, very difficult to for us to plan and get our heads around. But as we can see, there's certainly an awful lot of encouragement there to support remote employees. What is interesting for me is that small 6% at the bottom. We will encourage more employees to work in the office, including those that work remotely. So there are some people that are planning to actually increase their level of office-based interactions. And then there's various people in between, a staggering 13% that will actually make it mandatory for all employees to work remotely. And a lot of people have seen the business benefits in terms of reduced costs of real estate really coming to the fore. And culturally, I guess those are some of those companies that are really more results orientated rather than, you as an employee are paid for your time between 9 and 5 in the office. So as long as those results are measured and they can see that you've achieved them, it really doesn't matter where you work from. So perhaps those are the sorts of cultural shifts that we need to make. And finally, before we get into our discussions, what I'd like to do is to sort of look at what the effects are of the coronavirus in terms of collaboration and communications. So the next slide, I call this our donut slide. What we've realized is that it's not just technology. A lot of times it's the processes that catch a lot of people by surprise. So I'm not too sure that there's any one person in a business that understands all the intricacies of all the business processes that actually take place. So maybe, and we'll discuss this in our panel, maybe there'll be a move more towards workforce automation. Maybe there's things that bots or some sort of workflow that can be automated that will help us in the future and help us allow us to spend more time doing the jobs that we really need to do. I couldn't imagine what it'd be like working in an IT department having to work out password resets as people forget what their passwords were for VPNs or things like that when they're working remotely. Maybe a bot there would help speed up that process and help the beleaguered colleagues in the IT department. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is work styles. We touched on that briefly, those based in the office, basically, and those that are nomadic. And also, how do we integrate that with the frontline workers that are doing such an amazing job and literally putting their lives at risk during this global pandemic? And although I shouldn't say this, by and large, I guess the technology is sometimes the easy solution, particularly when it's cloud-based, because the risks to adoption are a lot less. You can sign up to a monthly contract, find out if it's working for you, and then decide to move on if it's hard to adopt or it's hard for your users to get their heads around. So this is why this is accelerating this move to the cloud. The risks are a lot less because you can subscribe to it as you would do with your music Spotify account or your movies with your Netflix. You can subscribe to these services, find out what works best for you rather than signing on to a 10-year deal with some premise-based equipment. I'd like to stop it there and we'll move on to our discussion. We've shared with you some various insights from Global Survey and what we feel is happening in terms of COVID acting as a way of compressing those trends, accelerating those trends and compressing the time that people are faced with as they move from old technology investments into new technology investments. So basically we've got sort of 4 topic areas. One will be what we have learned from this and what can we do to prevent further disruption if business continuity events, I guess it's not a case of if, I guess it's a case of when business continuity hits us again. We'll be discussing the sort of points of vulnerability or areas where we should have been better prepared. We'll also be looking at how companies need to adapt to be more inclusive of these flexible work styles and virtual ways of working. And then finally, we'll sort of look at ways in which we can unify this dispersed virtual workplace. I don't know for our panelists, maybe it's a question that we'll slide in there. The increased use of video is really apparent as people realize that although we're physically distanced, we need to be socially interactive. We're social animals, we're social people. And I think video provides us with that ability to reach out to our colleagues and just, how are you? How are you doing? How are you weathering this storm? How are you getting on? And I think that's been vital during this pandemic. Okay, so let's open this up to our panelists. So as we start looking at there, I'm going to throw it out to everyone on our call. Welcome. How do you feel we could be better prepared for any future disruption? And What have we really learned?
Well, Tim, I take the question. This is Thomas from Rehau. Well, to describe the situation, Rehau is a global company. We have more than 20,000 employees. We have more than 170 locations worldwide. We're a company of 3 billion euro sales plus. And so we are a typical manufacturing company which is used to develop continuity plans, to work on the topics and prepare. And so this is a unique situation. So could anybody prepare in the right way? I think we couldn't. So it's kind of sailing on site, really to see what is going on and adapting plans. And so what we did as a company is in late March, as we have seen the signs in China in our business, we immediately started setting off a task force. Comprehensive task force consisting of the top management, financial guys, healthcare guys, security, environmental, IT, and really thinking, okay, what is now the impact? How can we preserve cash from a financial perspective? How can we work with our partners on the contracts? How can we secure supply chain? So really comprehensive work and really week by week, day by day, seeing what the situation is and preparing. And our philosophy has been like planning for the worst, but work on the better. So we had plans in place saying, okay, if sales drops dramatically down, how can we survive? How can we pay our salaries? What is with short-time working in Germany? How can we deal in other countries where the instruments of Europe, Germany, Austria are not there, or UK? And so we did a lot of stuff. From the IT perspective, I guess we have been already on the way. So we had a lot of cloud tools. We had a social intranet already in place. We had already 60% of our population being able to work remotely. That is what we tackled. That is what we increased to a certain extent. That is what we monitored closely, like starting first no videos and then over time allowing it. So technology is the backbone, but wasn't our focus. Our focus is still to preserve the business. What we have seen is that working on the business side, that is the so-called easy thing, but working on the social aspects, how to deal now with the workforce being remote, playing the kids around in your office, the working times, how do you plan for meetings? How do you continue your projects? So all these questions kind of have been in our focus, and we learned a lot basically in that. Also leadership. I mean, we're used to maybe work 1 a day per week remotely. Now the team is spread, and how do you manage your team? How can you motivate your team, and so on? And so these has been all the aspects. I would say we're kind of stable, and so we're kind of more in mid case, not in worst case. That is good, but I think we are just halfway through, right? So we see the impacts right now in Americas, for example. I think we have to prepare for a second wave. We have to prepare, even think about more to come. So we're doing good on one hand. On the other hand, I guess we need to tackle it further on.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Some really interesting insights there. Is there anything that you feel that has really caught you by surprise that as you do start planning for a second wave, that you have really learned from? I mean, part of that was the social aspect, which sounds interesting because that's not necessarily the remit of the IT department. How are you working with other departments to sort of get over those sorts of social barriers or those cultural shifts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting just to comment on this point about the sort of social interaction and what we learned from that. One thing that we've learned during this crisis is the importance of over communicating. And the value of the sort of personal connection to the leadership of the company in a time of crisis. And actually, the technology that we've been able to use, the video, the collaboration tools, the regular all hands meetings, we've ended up doing a weekly email or video from our CEO to everyone in the company, and numerous all hands meetings. And we have found that actually this has had the sort of unexpected side effect of really helping people to feel connected into the whole, in what is obviously a very difficult time, and to personally relate to senior leaders in the organization in a way that actually they never did before. We all get to see inside each other's houses, we get interrupted by our kids or pets or whatever. And this insight into each other's lives reminds us that we're all human beings as well as co-workers, and it's actually really valuable social and relationship capital. So that was a bit of an unexpected effect. But we also learned, I think, with video incredibly useful, collaboration through video, very powerful. But one of the things that we found is that during the crisis, because everybody, at least in our company, almost everybody has been working from home. So everybody has been on video. And one of the things we realized through that is that previously, the take up of video collaboration tools wasn't always that great, partly because you always had some people who were in a meeting room somewhere, and then the people who were on video were almost like sort of second-class citizens in that interaction. Whereas now with everybody on video, it's much more inclusive. And, we found that to be really powerful. And now the question for all of us, I think, is as we, eventually get through the COVID crisis and things return to more to normal, how do we make sure that we keep the learnings from that and are still able to use those collaboration tools in that kind of inclusive way? And that's not
Graham,
technology, it's about the process of how we do it.
Yeah, Graham, you touched on some very interesting areas there specifically. One of which was you said that your senior management are making recordings. Now, that's really interesting because I've heard a number of colleagues and friends and family members, they refer to Zoom fatigue, where people are just completely maxed out with the amount of meetings that they have to attend. And recordings is something that we need to sort of think more about, because then we can play it via podcast when we're out running or exercising. We can watch it in our own time. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have 2,000 people in the world all descending onto one meeting when there's no need for it, because it's just imparting information. So I think one thing that's interesting is our choice of technology tools as we start looking to communicate, which I don't think we've really given a great deal of consideration over.
That's certainly true. One of the things that we're seeing is an increase in asynchronous communication. So there is an element of Zoom fatigue, which makes all the newspapers, and it's a reality. I think for us, we were always very, very heavily into video conferencing, but I think the ability to asynchronously communicate through podcasts or video recordings has increased. But I think the other thing that we've experienced, and we're still struggling with the answers to this question, is the blurring between work and non-work. I think a lot of people in our organization are really finding those boundaries very hard to maintain, where people are now, I get emails from people, 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m. And I think it's increasing the pressure on individuals who, sometimes, I've got a lovely garden, I can go and sit in the garden. Some people are actually sitting in, sharing a room with people when they're trying to work. And I think the blurring between those things increase the stress on people. And I think one of the things we've got to figure out as an organization, I think all of us actually, not just our organization, is how do we help people maintain those boundaries between the different elements of work?
Yeah, I've always heard, thank you, David. I've always heard about work-life balance, but I almost feel that it's impossible to balance, and we should perhaps think about work-life integration. As long as my company can see that I'm doing what's expected of me, does it matter if I have a little bit of a later start at 9:15 or have a bit of an earlier finish if I want to exercise, go for a run, take the dog for a walk or whatever? I'm quite interested in the cultural shifts. Are we going to move to more results-orientated mindset rather than I'm paid between these 2 hours between 9 and 5? Really interesting. I'll be interested to see if there's any other people on the call that feel that there's other technology that we have not yet mentioned that has been really beneficial.
It's interesting. We were experimenting with flexible working before this all started, just in a couple of offices. So the concept being the number of hours you do a week is measured as an average over a month, and you can work wherever you want, whenever you want. And that we were trying it in an office in Australia and one of our offices, Liverpool office in the UK, and it was so successful and so popular, people didn't want to go backwards. But the technology challenges were things like flexible timesheet systems, and a lot of the out-of-the-box products don't really support that kind of flexibility. So we had to do a lot of integration and work to make that work. And of course, COVID hits, and all the preconceptions around, there's still those people in our organizations that think you're judged by being at your desk for 9 a.m. and all that's blown out of the water. And I think that the shift that's going to happen now is exactly that. It's a completely different way of working for a large percentage of the workforce from now on. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think that will become normal, and it might change and alter as it goes along. The other thing that we learned that I thought was quite interesting is the ability for people to adapt in a crisis. The people on this call, the number of change projects I'm sure you've been through where we've had to put lots of resources into doing a rollout of a system such as Zoom or Teams across a global business, and the amount of change management required and training required. COVID comes along, we deploy to 17,000 users in 2 days, and everyone's able to use it and adapt really quickly. And it just shows what people really can do if they're really focused and there's a crisis, and we're all moving in the same direction. And I think that is a really big lesson for us in terms of maintaining the momentum of technology change.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, very good point. I'm interested to explore, was there anything that completely blindsided you? Was there anything that you weren't prepared for?
So in Rehau, it was like the sales areas in a certain way where the business continuity plans not really were in place. So we have been figuring out that we need to increase the remote working in sales office by a lot, basically. And so we needed to provide laptops and so on through the borders, which have been closed. So that was kind of surprised. I think we also haven't been prepared in a way in the social aspect that we have been covering so far, because how we deal in a permanent base with this topic now, day by day, over months, I think nobody prepared for that. So that is a kind of a shock where we need really to prepare and give you some insight. Yesterday, I had the very first meeting after 4 months with my direct reports on ground here in Rehau, Germany. And everybody said, oh, it's so great to be back here in the team and to talk face to face and to see reactions and behaviors and to interact. Yeah. So I think that is really, we're kind of in a shock now from this old video stuff and Zoom and so on. And now to see what is the right mix, that is really the path moving forward. And so, yeah, it's really about technology on one hand and sales, not prepared for that, and also for the length of the things to happening.
Thank you, Thomas.
I agree totally with that, Thomas. The change, I think, from having a very interactive workforce that met socially in an office, I think a lot of people missed that, but more so, I think, was the interaction with the customer. And so a heavily geared sales organization that TATA are, I think that face-to-face interaction with our customers where we'd meet them on a regular basis was all of a sudden overnight gone. And then how do you adapt to that when the demands on our business are the same with regard to revenue and having to sell? How do you adapt and ensure that the numbers are met, but you can only communicate with people either by video or over the phone? I think that's a great point. And I think there's one of the things, maybe two things, to take away from this is, being a technology company, we adapted really quite quickly. Within 2 weeks, we had 98% of the workforce working from home. So we then sort of focused our attention purely on the customers and ensuring that the customers were in good shape and how we can help them. But I think all the points that have been raised about the social aspects of being in the office, we've gradually evolved over these last 3 months to have things like the huddles, certain organisations, part of the organisations, invite people for a drink online. So at 5 o'clock on a Friday, people can drop in and have a glass of wine and some snacks. There's a fitness class that happens at 7 o'clock every morning. Things like this have evolved, and I think they're really good practice to adapt to and to adopt to. But I think that the customer interactivity is one that we missed on, and I think that going forward, that should be part of the business continuity program, is to ensure that we have something in place that we don't find this hiatus of direct customer interactivity, because there were some questions being asked about, well, how do we do this now? And forecasts were going down on the basis of not having the right level of customer interaction.
Thanks, Steve. It almost sounds like some sort of customer outreach program.
Yes.
Would that be a way to summarize?
Yeah, I think that
it,
would be fair.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, folks. Let's move on to our next topic, our topic area. So we basically touched on some of this, but where were the vulnerability points? I mean, I've heard all sorts of horror stories about IT departments running out of laptops and urgently going to their local electrical outlets, PC World or what have you, or going to Amazon and buying up laptops like there was no tomorrow to try and equip a workforce that they weren't prepared to suddenly rush home and trying to do business as in whatever sense it was in terms of readjusting to this new normal. So where were vulnerability points? I should imagine some of them may have been around remote access like VPNs. One thing that we have heard is a lot of people underinvested in basic things like training. And when people were working remotely, it's, well, how do I switch on video? I haven't got a webcam. I haven't got a headset. All I've got is my Beats audio headset or my Apple earpods, or how do I connect this to this? Anyone like to open up with some of their areas of vulnerability and ways in which they can mitigate that moving forwards, perhaps?
I guess I can address this and talk about things from the perspective of perhaps a non-traditional company like a sporting organization. Kind of interesting that we all as technologists sometimes struggle to push innovation through our organizations. I've heard references to shifting culture, mindsets, etc., and and the one thing I think we all realize is actually necessity is the mother of innovation, and that's certainly what we found in terms of how we address and how we deal with these situations. So for me, when we talk about vulnerability, there's probably only 3 words that really spring to mind, and that is security, security, and security. That the level of vulnerability has become more significant and very much escalated to the risk of malicious cyber attacks. So we've invested a lot of time and a lot of focus around increasing our awareness of GDPR across the organization, introducing multi-factor authentication, and really tightening up on VPN access, particularly to those critical services. So it's really that need that's been driven through necessity that's highlighted areas of where we need to focus and where we need to address perhaps those vulnerable areas.
Thank you, Michael. That's essential. I mean, I heard initially significant organizations using consumer apps, freemium services, WhatsApp, for example, just to keep the ball rolling. But of course, all your compliance and governance goes out the window when you start using consumer apps. So GDPR and other policies and procedures and things in place sort of go out the window as soon as you break down and start using WhatsApp or whatever. Goodness knows, I'm too old now. Maybe TikTok. I don't know. I don't know what the apps are out there now. Anybody else want to add another sort of perspective to that?
Yeah, I think so. We had a couple of test runs before this hit. We've got a very large office in Hong Kong, and the protests in Hong Kong caused us to initiate some of our business continuity plans. So we'd done some live preparation at a smaller scale, which was actually incredibly helpful. But one of the things that I think that we didn't fully consider, and is something we have learned and need to think about, I think, in the future, is that it's all very well us having our business continuity plan and our strategy and be able to run our business, but what about our suppliers and our clients? And Arup does about 15 to 17,000 projects a year, of every kind of scale, from a fire strategy right through to building a skyscraper. So if you look at those, we work with a diverse set of clients, and some of those clients were able to get working again faster than others, and the same with our suppliers. And in our business, sometimes our competitors are also our joint venture partners, and we rely heavily on those partners if we're in a joint venture. HS2 is an example of lots of different organizations working together collaboratively. If one organization in 6 can't operate in this new way of working because of a major incident like this, then it can actually stop the whole process. And we found ourselves actually provisioning laptops and devices and software for our clients just so our projects could keep running. And I don't think we'd fully considered the impact of that. And that was quite an interesting piece of learning. And we were fortunate we were able to respond to it. But I do think the whole ecosystem of connectivity that goes beyond your own organization is one thing that we will be considering a lot more in the future.
That's fascinating. What springs to mind? Good grief. Talk about synchronicity. My old school motto was "No man is an island," and it almost feels the same with companies. Of course, you can do whatever you can within your company, but the suppliers and partners, customers, they are all essential. And I think as we start looking towards supporting contingency workers, temporary staff, as we start to re-establish our businesses and reboot, I think that inclusivity of making sure that everyone within your ecosystem will become more and more vital. Is there any sort of technology that's really helped there, Rob?
Well, I think that one of the things, we've seen in recent years, security and data becoming more prevalent in contracts, both from us to suppliers and clients to us. And I'm sure others will have seen this, clauses around cybersecurity and meeting minimum standards, cyber essentials, whatever that is, clauses around, data and who owns the data, and people are getting a lot wiser to these kind of things. I can see us seeing more around business continuity appearing in contracts now. What is your ability to maintain business in the event of a crisis? I could see that joining the kind of list of things that get added to contracts going forward, and I think that's something we're going to have to be able to respond to.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I would see it in 2 phases right now. So the operations of the last 3 months, there definitely endpoint security was one of the hot topics, just to safeguard that everybody is working in that safe and secure environment. And we have seen a lot of more attacks, and where user training, user awareness was also a big topic. But the interesting point now is the re-ramp, boots the business again. And there, the supply chain, to control the supply chain is a hot topic. We are part of us automotive business tier 1. So reliability of the orders from the OEMs is horrible. So if you plan for 1 shift and you get the orders for the shift and they change within the shift, the orders, it drives you crazy and you can't generate the cash and the margins you want to. So that is really what we learned now after 3 months of being stabilizing the business. Is now, how can you plan? Is it now a V shape? Is it a U shape? To what level sales is getting back? How can you control this supply chain? Because if one of the suppliers fails for the OEMs, Rehau might be also impacted because we couldn't deliver, for example, our bumpers. So that is really the 2 phases we have seen.
Thank you, Thomas.
I think there's an interesting point that actually Thomas and Rob kind of raised there, and that's the importance of the supply chain. But if I can just extend that a little further, we talk about vulnerable kind of points, and one thing that I've noticed through this period, and nobody kind of wish for the COVID pandemic, but it's there and we have to kind of deal with it and we have to address it. But what I've sensed is the industry is collaborating in a way that it's never had to before. So whether that's around suppliers or even competitors. So I now sit on forums where I'm engaging and I'm learning from my competitors on, you know, their learning points and what's worked well and what hasn't worked well. And, you know, it's a real interesting byproduct of this period whereby everybody is really coming together and to get through it in a successful way. And as I say, I think it's a very interesting byproduct of the period.
Fascinating. Thank you, Michael.
Certainly from a TATA perspective, I mean, we enabled, I think, very quickly 150 organizations, 500,000 users quite quickly to help and support the customer and our supplier base. And the three things that we picked up and we learned from this was really around security. Security was fundamental to what was required because now obviously the communication links now go out to individual homes via the public bandwidth and the public broadband. Second was access to their applications and how they could continue to access those services and those facilities and those capabilities online. And I think thirdly, it was then a discussion about how new services and new technologies could help them overcome the current problems that they were in, and therefore communicate and secure much better interactivity with their customers and their suppliers. And one of the interesting things that also popped out was some of the legal elements as well, the documentation that needed previously to come to an individual person, get posted to a registered office for someone to sign, overcoming things like this, which you wouldn't necessarily think about unless there's a COVID situation around, that really need to be overcome quickly so that people can react and respond to contracts and continue doing business in a safe and secure way.
I think the one other thing to add to that, I think I agree with everything that everybody said, is for us as an IT consultancy, a lot of our interactions were always face-to-face with clients. And we've been doing a lot of work with new tools. So obviously everybody's jumping onto Zoom or Teams or whatever. But there's a lot of other things in terms of interactive tools, you know, interactive whiteboards, tools like Mural, that actually do help you to work very effectively remotely with your customers. The problem is that they don't know how to use those tools either. So it's very similar to the things the other gentlemen talked about, is you've got to take them on a journey as well. You know, they want to carry on working with you, but you're trying to introduce not only continue with the deliveries that you're already doing, but you're suddenly having to do things remotely and introduce a whole set of new tools and techniques into that. How do we do remote workshops with these interactive tools? We're still learning how to do some of that, and then we're going to have to take our clients on the same journey instantaneously. It's proving quite challenging.
Thank you, David. Oh, this is a question that we haven't really thought about, but I'm going to throw it in here anyway. Is good enough good enough? We've spent a fortune as an industry promoting telepresence and really high-end telepresence units in offices. Obviously, you know, there are some better headsets than others, some better video cameras than others. Has technology like laptop webcams, has that stood up? You know, what's the lowest common denominator for a lot of you guys? Have some of you turned around and said, the audio quality is like unacceptable for my tinny speakers and microphones, or is good enough good enough? Are you looking at cutting back on? Sorry.
So we've done a lot of replacing kit for people and shipping out. You know, Jabra speakers pretty much sold out on Amazon. I think people noticed, and people have adapted and realised maybe wearing a headset 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week is not actually that practical. And so I think that a lot of people have been adjusting, and we've seen people's home office spaces develop over the last few weeks has been interesting. I think what will be more interesting is to see how the professional standards adapt to this. You know, the COBITs, the control objectives for IT, ITIL, you know, service delivery, capacity planning, and all these kind of different standards and governance standards that we adhere ourselves to and aspire to you know, deliver against. It'll be interesting to see how they respond to recognize this changing world, but also pick up on those lessons learned that we've talked about. And I think there's some things missing now from some of those best practices that it's going to need a kind of a 2020 update to kind of focus the whole industry and everyone meeting that kind of that new high standard.
I come back to this point of necessity that I mentioned earlier on, Tim. I mean, it's kind of interesting that in the last 12 months, we've had, three kind of modus operandi, three modes of our operations delivering. 12 months ago, we decided to refurbish our headquarters and we moved out of Wentworth, of our headquarters at Wentworth Golf Club. We moved into service accommodation. There was one shift. We then moved back into our headquarters when that refurbishment was completed. That was kind of two modes of operation, and now we're facing our third mode of operation with the pandemic. But we used that period, that necessity, to really think about what was going to create a flexible environment for people. So, for example, we took handsets off the desk and we gave everyone a soft phone, and everyone's coded number was imported into the cloud. In fact, all of our office systems went into the cloud. And that level of agility, if we had gone to that workforce and said, oh, by the way, when you come in on Monday, you're not going to have the phone on the desk, there'd have been all sorts of pushback. But because we had this period of necessity, we're moving out of the office, we're going into service accommodation, this is the way it needs to be, that created an absolute mind shift that would not have been feasible before. So the adoption of collaborative capabilities, new tools, a new way of working, agile working, all of this has been possible because of this necessity that has been born out of the pandemic situation. So, it has been, I said it earlier on, nobody wished for this period, but it's been quite an incredible enabler for adoption of new technology throughout our organizations.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, Michael, extend on that, the level of appreciation increased by a lot, basically. So the people really started to appreciate that technology is there and is operational. And so it was not a question about the, let's say, hardware. There was appreciation that they could run their business, that they could work remotely. And so that brought us really in a positive way to the next level. Yeah,
people kind of view working from home right now in our organization as an extension of the office. And they don't kind of view technology as being those guys over there. We have fundamentally changed their attitude towards what technology can deliver for the organization. Is a true enabler of business and continuity.
So do you think this sort of pandemic, really fascinating discussion here, because I've always felt frustrated that technology hasn't really been viewed as a strategic platform that adds business value. I almost feel like as an industry we've missed the mark, and I almost feel that sort of elevated that sort of status for technology as a way of, well, not only keeping the lights on, but also as a strategic platform to build on.
That is like your backbone. If it's working well, you don't recognize, but if it hurts, you say, oh, my back hurts, yeah? And that is with technology. If it works, great, and they appreciate that it's working. That's my philosophy.
I think what is really, really emphasized as well during this period, where everyone has suddenly become reliant on technology and necessity in a way that perhaps we didn't before, is it's demonstrated the critical importance of reliability and service quality and great user interfaces of the tools, particularly for collaboration tools. So when we think about, you mentioned telepresence. I mean, telepresence would be great, but actually, when you're in this kind of crisis situation, that isn't really what matters. It's about, can people communicate? Can people collaborate in the way that they need to? Are the tools that you're using intuitive and really simple to use? That it's kind of flushed out the importance of that, I think, this whole situation.
Yeah, I think
what it's also done is I think it's brought home to people. We talk a lot about agility and speed of change and transformation, And I think for a lot of people, it's brought home to them that that just isn't possible without the right IT. And I think it's moved IT to be much more in the core of the business for a lot of organizations who realize that they just can't achieve what they want to achieve without the agility. And the speed of business change has accelerated massively. We've just been talking about it. It's been the constant theme for the last number of years, and suddenly it's gone up another step. And without the right IT, then you can't have that business agility.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's been a coming of age for technologists and IT people, really. And, you know, there's always been that perception as IT is a cost center rather than a value center. And I think that shift, this incident, this crisis, if, you know, even 5 years ago, I don't think businesses would have been able to manage like they have been able to manage now. For so many reasons, whether that be infrastructure, technology, capability, all those sorts of things. But it has been a real moment. And I think the rhetoric around the value of technology has always been there. You've always heard CEOs going, yeah, well, you need the technology strategy is absolutely critical to our business and all this kind of thing. But the reality of it sometimes is quite different, especially when businesses are under various pressures. And all of a sudden, I think that there's a different narrative now around what technology means. And there's a bit that someone was talking about earlier on about the human aspect, about actually the technology teams have been communicating a lot more with their users in a human way and sharing a lot more of their experiences. And I think that's how to enormously put a human face on these technology people that sometimes are invisible and behind the scenes. And I think the business is now recognizing totally that it is that reliance that David talks about.
Certainly. Well, let's move on to our next slide. And as we sort of lead up into this, for some reason, I'm reminded of a little joke that, well, joke. I'm not sure if I'm in the right company to share it. But I often say there's three types of CIOs. There's the CIO where it stands for career is over, because you've got no resources at all you've got no resources to hand. You've got the chief infrastructure officer whose job is to keep the lights on for less, really, and just to keep the network running. And then you've got the chief innovation officer, and thankfully it feels like I'm in good company with innovative thinkers and people that actually, you know, that is their essentially that is their role, to look at ways in which technology can innovate and help in these areas. Unfortunately, you know, the chief infrastructure officer and the career is over. I wonder how they're surviving in these difficult times. So that leads us up to our question. We've been speaking a little bit about it. How can we adapt more to these flexible ways of working? What technology has worked? We've spoken about partners and suppliers and how you can have those as part of your business continuity plans. Also writing that into some of the terms and conditions, as Rob pointed out. What technology tools do your businesses value the most? Is there any sort of technology map or technology roadmaps that you feel will apply as a result of the learnings from this, perhaps?
It's Steve here from TATA. What we've seen, I think, is a shift in the type of technology being required from us, the type of support. So there's been a shift away from pure network infrastructures towards more unified communications asks, and we've seen that shift happen really quite quickly. So where, you know, we would have a relatively healthy pipeline on interconnectivity of network infrastructure, that pipeline and those orders are now being expressed in a more unified communication type of way to adapt and adopt to the new environment that we're in. What will be interesting, I think, as well, is to understand how the requirements of the customers will change, in a sense of they understand and they know the technology now that's being used. They've tried the technology, they understand it. Quality, as we've just said, is maybe not right at the top of the list anymore, providing it works is good enough. And we can rely on it, and it is the backbone of what we need to have by way of supportive structure to make our organizations operate. It's the nervous system of any organization. If those RFPs or those requests for proposals will change on the back of a reduced service level agreement, for example, if the requirements and the fundamental targets that an organization needs to hit as a supplier will fall as a result of a bit more understanding, a bit more flexibility around the requirement for technology.
Thank you, Steve.
I think from our perspective, again, from a sports perspective, it's been really interesting. We've gone from perhaps being considered the stage that nobody kind of quite knows there, but rely upon it to actually being part of the show, and nothing is more prevalent than right now when we have now restarted our season. Golf is back for our professional players, and one of the main essentials in terms of keeping everybody health and safety is how we create a connectionless environment back on the golf course. So pre-COVID, players would typically arrive on a course. They would go into the tournament office, they would register, they would pick up lots of bits of information around tee times and around pin positions, etc., etc. Within 3 weeks, we've had to create a contactless environment, and all of that is now online. So players now, they register online, they get all of that information. It's a virtual notice board, and it's really quite incredible how overnight we've gone from what was quite a one-on-one interactive environment to now being totally contactless. And we don't often think about less as being more, but in our world moving forward, less will be more. We're going into an environment where we need to consider contactless, ticketless, cashless, and ensuring the safety and integrity of all key stakeholders, whether it's players, whether it's media, whether it's operational staff. And there's a real legacy there from this period that we'll be keen to or be looking to move forward with.
Really interesting, Michael. Have you got any perspective on Spectators? I mean, the thing that flashed in my mind is what a fantastic way to nurture an online community that are just fascinated with golf or love golf. Is there anything that you're doing there? Any changes to the business where you sort of think, well, it used to be televised and we used to have pundits talking about what was happening. As you move more to this sort of different online digital way, are you doing anything around Spectators to help them engage more and really enjoy the Ryder Cup?
I mean, absolutely. Sadly, we don't have the Ryder Cup this year. That's been rescheduled into 2021. But it's a European tour. We are typically we have 44 tournaments in a given year in 31 countries. Sadly, this year, because of the pause, that will be somewhat less. But we're still planning on running around about 20 to 25 tournaments in the rest of the year. There's only one fan right now, and that's a fan from home, which means that we have to put more emphasis on our TV product. And data and information gives us that. We've gone from just collecting scoring on a regular, hole by hole kind of philosophy now to collecting up to 15 data points on every player and on every stroke. And I know we're kind of moving on from the main thesis of the today's session, but the emphasis on data has never been more significant than ever, and arming the spectator in our world with more insight, more intelligence, so they get a sense of feeling as empowered as a traditional broadcast commentator. So the answer to the question is yes, absolutely.
So strategic responsiveness takes on a whole different meaning when you're thinking about Spectators, and being able to adapt there. Although we may have been a little bit off topic, it is proving that you are able to react and readapt to your business needs.
I think there's a general thing, I think everybody's done amazing jobs getting everybody working remotely. Okay, well, let's not stand still now. What's the next step? I'm sure we'll come on to that question. But we're already starting to look at new technologies. The sales and marketing team are suddenly having to work in a much more remote fashion. How are they going to do that? Some of the traditional IT and methodologies for doing that are going to have to change. How do we run remote company meetings? How do we run events in an interactive way in this new world? Just running a webinar is probably not going to be sufficient going forward. So what are the new technologies that are emerging to allow you to do a much more immersive experience virtual cameras. We're looking at, for example, what gamers do, because they have some really cool technology about how they immerse themselves into a particular environment. You could adapt those to look at how you do company meetings. So it's not just, you know, a presentation and somebody talking. You can actually have a much more immersive one. So I think that generally from an IT perspective, it's important that we celebrate that we've managed to do so much so quickly. And I think everybody's amazed, you know, wow, look at what we can do if we really, really put our minds to it. Let's not stop there. Let's take that to the next level, and let's start looking at the new technologies that are emerging to see how we leverage those.
Definitely.
Yeah,
So back to the sort of technology adoption life cycle as we start looking at what new value we can get out of new technology. Thomas,
and Tim, I mean, it's not only about new technology, because I think it's there, already there. The tools are there. The question is, how do you adapt those tools? And we have seen that the younger generation, collaborative tools, cloud service, they used it. Yeah, now I see the middle-aged guys, the older guys saying, oh, that's cool. How can I do whiteboarding? So I think one of the unique chances is now to adopt technology in a better way, to use technology tools in a better way and not just provide it and say, okay, now that's a new cool tool, right?
definitely.
Yeah, we've definitely had to adapt our digital products and services. So for example, we have a pedestrian simulation tool that simulates people moving around designs of buildings and infrastructure. Pretty much every public building, a large piece of infrastructure, has a simulation done to show where things like pinch points are and population and all that sort of thing. So that was quickly adapted to include social distancing. So you can add a 2-meter rule in, and then you can simulate your environment to understand how it would work in that space. And that's both a kind of an important adaptation and a service for people, but also it's a product that we sell. And another example would be in remote inspections. You know, inspecting infrastructure has now, we were already developing drone inspection, but now it's highly in demand. You know, how do we inspect this infrastructure without physically a human being there? And can we use these technologies to do that? And so it's those sorts of things. I think we went through the whole period of getting everybody working remotely from home, and the mad rush to do that. We were through that quite quickly, and then we're into, well, actually, how do we develop and adapt as a business now? And we're well into that phase now, I think.
Thank you, Rob. Let's move to our last and final question then. Well, last is final. Let's move to our final question. So we spoke about VPN. We spoke about how the compliance and governance gets affected when people start using freemium and consumer apps. What else do we need to consider to secure these dispersed and diverse and distributed workers in the virtual workplace?
Well, one of the things that's come. Sorry, please go ahead.
I think one of the things that's going to be very interesting going forward here is just going back to thinking about business continuity in the broadest sense, right? We are increasingly, we are in a data-driven world, and data is enabling new products, new services, new business models. But I think it's also going to enable different approaches to thinking about business continuity as well, because if you think about some of the technologies that we have coming down the pipe with AI and 5G connectivity and the Internet of Things, and the ability through that to be able to monitor and really understand what is going on in your broader business environment, both inside the company and outside the company, right? And that is going to lead to opportunities in business continuity to be able to be more predictive, to use data to understand when things are going to potentially go wrong, or to understand trends that are going on in the environment of the type of business that you operate in, and therefore to be better prepared. So I think there are opportunities actually bringing this sort of right back into thinking about business continuity itself. I think there are going to be opportunities in how some of the new technologies that we're seeing today will enable a better and a better prepared and faster response to crisis situations in the future through some of these technologies.
Organizations.
Sorry.
You go ahead, David.
I'm just going to touch on the data point. I think for me, when we've been talking about this internally, we want to bring more agility to the business leaders to try experiment with the business, because no one's quite sure how the business is going to change over the next year. We're all guessing a little bit, but in order to fix that circle, we've got to give them the data immediately to see how the business changes that they're making are impacting their business. So I think going forward, there's going to be an increased need for us to provide the right data platforms for people to see the results of the changes they're making quickly. And again, that's just a self-reinforcing circle. Try business change. What was the impact? Try something else. What was the impact? Because we're all guessing. I'm certainly guessing as to how our business is going to evolve.
Yeah,
I agree. I think there's going to be a call for more flexibility, more agility in network infrastructures and communicating platforms. And I think that there's going to be perhaps, and it'd be interesting to see how this pans out, more demand for global providers rather than organizations trying to build a patchwork quilt between providers. Now, maybe that's something that will evolve as well over time, but just to have one provider that can provide the agility and flexibility globally may become more attractive as organizations look for a bit more security, a bit more stability, and the agility and flexibility to go with that.
I mean, as we're kind of talking about a geographically dispersed workplace, the thing that resonates to me is our strategy over the last few years has always been firmly based upon cloud-based delivery and mobile-first architecture, and it's that combination that really ensures that our data and our systems are fully accessible at the very edge of our operations. So it doesn't matter whether our staff are working from the office or whether they're on a greenfield site, pre-operations or even during the live operations at a tournament. The mode of access and operations remains exactly the same wherever our staff choose to or need to work, and we've enabled them not to feel like they're contacting with technology, but with content. And therefore, their location, wherever they are in the world, is simply an extension of the office. And that feels about right for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that in terms of one of the big issues, and we could spend all day talking about security, we see it in the press all the time, more and more compromises happening. I think there's a lot of work still to be done in educating users. I wonder how many users sit in their home office with a smart speaker next to them, and do they know what that means? And they're the new threats from the home working, along with all the threats that were there. I think the same principles still exist about being able to detect, respond, and recover from either minor or major cyber incidents. But actually, I'm constantly surprised by the number of organizations that don't have the deep capability to detect compromises into their organizations, into their data, into their systems, for lots of reasons. And I think that we need to move more quickly to zero trust environments and electronics rights management and all these kinds of things. That often legacy stops us getting there, because it sounds good on the tin, and then when actually you get into it, there's always lots of legacy reasons. I see people nodding. We all have these challenges in our organizations in terms of deployment, but actually, I think that the cybersecurity question remains largely unanswered at the moment in this new environment, and there's lots of unknowns because of the home working. I think it's when people are in their offices, at least we know they're behind their corporate firewall. Soon as they're working at home, we're relying on the level of security of their home router, and I think there's a whole host of risks that we're going to have to address over the coming months and years.
Definitely, really great observations.
Tim, let me elaborate a little bit. I see a triangle of topics we need to cover to secure the dispersed virtual workplace. First is technology. It needs to be there, and we need to use the tools. We need to use the backbone infrastructure. But secondly, it's the people. So we need to address a topic, how the people use these workplaces throughout the geographies. And thirdly, how do we lead? So the leadership aspect, and that is pretty important. How can you motivate? How can you bring forward your teams? And so this kind of needs to imbalance this kind of triangle. So it's really getting beyond the sole IT perspective in my view.
Thank you, Thomas. We've gone the full circle really about the people, processes, and technology. The old sort of the old sort of maxim that was sort of decades old, where people sort of said, well, you can do the technology, you've got to think about the people and the processes. It feels like it's done the whole circle, and perhaps adding culture to it as well. Gentlemen, I'm really respectful of your time. Thank you ever so much for your contributions. I'd just like to, perhaps you could summarize in a couple of sentences what you're taking away with you. Have you learned from your fellow colleagues? What sort of what's your next steps to weather this very difficult storm? Couple of sentences. Let's go round in the order that we're presenting in. So Graham, would you like to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So I think, I mean, to me, it does feel, I mean, both from this discussion and just seeing what's going on in the world at the moment in business, it feels like resilience and the ability to adapt quickly to unforeseen events is getting much more share of mind in enterprise planning in companies. I think tactically, we've all learned, you know, through the COVID-19 crisis, we've all learned a lot about how to be more productive and efficient with virtual working and collaboration. And we really need to bed in the gains from that and not end up going back to old ways of working once we're through the crisis. And then finally, I think, you know, looking to the sort of longer term future, with the increased technology complexity that's coming down the pipe, with global complex supply chains that we have, with everything in the cloud, you know, the companies that are going to win will also need to be resilient and agile in their response to the unexpected, right? And are going to need to be able to use data-driven business continuity approaches to help mitigate the threats that will come along.
Thank you, Graham. Some really great insights there. Yourself, Rob, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think there's two big challenges that are facing us right now, beyond COVID, that this has an opportunity, this experience we've gone through and the rapid acceleration in change in technology and home working over the last few months gives us an opportunity. And I think the first one is around sustainability. You know, it was the top of the agenda before this happened. It remains up the agenda. We've proven digital and technology can significantly help maintain economies of the world in certain places and businesses while significantly reducing our carbon footprint. And I think we need to push that agenda and drive that further. I think that's a really important contribution beyond the resilience of businesses, but the resilience of our society. And then the other issue, of course, is diversity. And our industry has been pretty bad. You know, you look at this panel, what we all white middle-aged males. And that, I think, is a really serious challenge that we have to address. And with what remote working brings us no excuses now. We can reach out to every group of people all over the world and have the most diverse workforces that we want. We just need to want to do it and take action on it. And I think what our challenge for us here with these technologies and our ability to drive change is we should now use that ability to drive change in other areas. And I think that the area of diversity is one area that the IT industry in particular needs to wake up and start taking and making a difference.
Definitely. Thank you, Rob. Michael, would you like to go next?
Yeah, it's pretty much just a one-liner from me, Tim. I think, you know, this period is technology has proved that it can be a core part of the organization's value stack, and we need to take the key learnings as legacy for the future, you know, the future well-being of our organizations as we seek to recover and ultimately get back to profitable growth once again.
Thank you very much indeed. And Thomas?
Well, I guess if you see the discussion, I guess it's a unique chance for us as CIOs and technology officers to grab now that chance in a way that we can demonstrate the value of IT, starting from the basic infrastructure to tools better used than ever been before. And this is a unique chance, so it should be like a glass half full of water. Yeah, and the other is you need to tackle those topics on a permanent base, on a day-to-day sailing on site and really reacting as fast as possible, because nobody knows if there is a second wave or what is it in the future, what is the new normal, and to be adaptive in a comprehensive manner just beyond IT, I think that's my philosophy right now.
Thank you. So think strategically, look to improve on agility. Steve, yourself.
Yeah, I think we've agreed on an awful lot, actually, and I think there's some real fundamental key themes here that we can all take away from this session. Because to hear us from different industries, from different areas of the business, looking at things through a different lens, and to come up with roughly the same views and opinions about things, means probably they're right. The views are right in that consolidation type of approach. I think that we've all faced the issue head on, the COVID issue, because we've had to. But out of that has come opportunity. And I think it's not just the opportunity to work in a different way. I think it's opportunity about serving our customers in a different way, but also opportunity about new services that we can offer to support our customers as we go forward as well. There's been plenty of view and opinion from our customer base about how the technology has helped them drive more value into their customers and provide them with a much better service, not only under these circumstances, but as we go forward. And I think for me, one of the big lessons learned is to repair the roof while the sun is shining. We've all been caught a little bit cold here. And I think certainly for me, the fire alarm analogy, I think, which you started off with, Tim, is an excellent one. We test our fire alarm, but we don't test our business continuity, certainly to a robust enough level to cater for this sort of eventuality. So that would be another key lesson learned for me.
Thank you very much, Steve. And then finally, moving on to David.
I think for me, I agree with everything everybody said. I think it's the acceleration of what was already happening. There's always been this constant discussion around every company is an IT company these days, but I'm not sure a lot of people really thought that. So the phrase we've been starting to use internally is IT-enabled business models. So giving the business leaders in our organization and in due course our customers, an IT. We've also started to use the phrase digitally native. So how do we create a platform of capabilities within our organization that the business can then use as building blocks to build a business they want? And that's the sort of the nirvana state that I think we want to go in. And certainly when I talk to some of our customers who engage us to help them build their IT, that's what they want as well. They want that flexibility. And I think what's happened over the last 6 months has been a realization from a lot of people that all this stuff around, yes, everybody's tech at core, everybody's a digital company, actually is true. And therefore they need to get the IT right to enable them, because they won't survive.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah, as we've been talking, as I finally wrap, and thank you once again for your time, and really appreciate it. Your diaries are very full. You lead very busy lives, I've no doubt. But as in terms of summary, I've sort of been writing some notes as we've been speaking, and I sort of think I'll leave some questions for our audience, actually. I guess, first of all, you've got to think about re-establishing the business. So what used to work well and needs to be brought back? I guess you also need to reassess. What do we used to do and we don't need to do now, for example? There's how do we reinvent ourselves? So what have we done out of necessity that is now delivering results? And I guess finally, the last one would be remove. So what have people had to do to survive that isn't going to be sustainable in the long term. And Steve, you touched on the great one is reimagining. How can we work more creatively to support these new ways of working and to be more agile? Thank you very much once again. And I'd like to conclude our recording there. Thanks very much.